Welcome, everybody. Today we are talking about power skills, and with me for this conversation is Scott Jeffrey Miller, 8-time best-selling author, former CMO at FranklinCovey, host of the largest leadership podcast. We'd love to hear about that later, and co-owner of the fastest-growing literary and talent agency in the nation. Scott, thanks for joining today.
Kent, what an honor. Thank you for the spotlight and the platform to talk about the things that I'm passionate about. I didn't say competent about, I said passionate about.
Passionate, okay.
The same. Not always the same.
Good distinction. And the honor is all mine. So as I usually like to start, I want to hear about your career story. I think, we were talking just before I hit recorded about, what chapter I'm on in my career. And I would love to hear, a little bit more, and I'm sure our audience would as well, hear a little bit more about your career and how you landed on what you're doing today.
With the highs or the lows? Which would you like? Because there's an equal number of both.
Warts and all, whatever you're willing to talk about.
Well, I live in Salt Lake City, Utah with my wife and our 3 young sons. I moved here 30 years ago after a short career at the Walt Disney Company. I'm from the East Coast, Orlando, Florida, and had a great run there until they invited me to leave, which is kind of how it happens at the Walt Disney Company. So here is a 27-year-old single Catholic boy from Orlando, Florida, and I move out to Provo, Utah. You can do the math 30 years ago, right? I think the priest and I were the only Catholics in Provo, Utah. But Stephen Covey invited me to join his then small boutique leadership firm called the Covey Leadership Center. Dr. Covey, of course, is the author of the seminal book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This book eventually became the FranklinCovey Company, one of the dominant forces in leadership development around the world. I spent almost 30 years inside of this organization, living around the world for them in Chicago and London and back to Utah several times. Ultimately, I served as the Chief Marketing Officer for 8 years, 3 times the national average of a public company CMO, and then for several years as the EVP of Thought Leadership. An amazing career inside of FranklinCovey, learned about how to become a leader, sold several $100 million of leadership solutions to clients, wrote 8 books along the way, nonfiction books that were all about careers and mentorship and management and marketing and parenting and leadership. Had the privilege, like you, of hosting a very popular leadership podcast, nearly 500 episodes. Wrote a couple books about that. And then about 2 years ago, decided I liked shining the spotlight on other people as much as I liked it on me. And so I, with a partner, launched what is now known as the Gray Miller Agency. We have about 200 thought leaders under representation on both the speaking and literary book side. So as you can see behind me, if you're watching this on video, my life is books. I love books. My boys, to their horror, are required to read 45 minutes a day. And my oldest son and I just released our 8th book. It's a parenting book that my 15-year-old son and I are touring the nation on, called Parenting Wrong Turns, Right Lessons, which basically exposes all of the bad decisions I made as a co-parent with my wife of our 3 sons. So
you're getting that feedback now instead of in 20 years.
Well, I'm sure I'm going to get my share. So I keep telling them, tell it to your therapist. Tell it to your therapist. We all have an origin story, right? We do our best. There is no manual. There is no training. There's no certification. There's no certificate or degree to be a parent. There's just the abuse and pain of watching us be tormented. That's it in a nutshell.
I love that. I remember so we just get to leave with your first child, right? So we just leave the hospital with this now? We just go? We're free to leave?
Totally.
Have to?
Yeah. Well, read my book, because there's a lot of validation on what things people are doing right, and maybe learn from some of my mistakes. And my 15-year-old son thanks you for his royalty on the book as well.
Nice. Well, I know my copy's on the way, so I'm looking forward to checking that out. Well, so I love that you wanted to talk about power skills today, and I think the moment you said that, I even threw out the I have a feeling we're doing we're kind of twisting the language here, trying to reframe what people have been talking about as soft skills for a long time, right? And even in my time in HR, I've heard L&D leaders, leadership development leaders, kind of leaning in to say, why is it that soft skills are the hardest skills, right? But I love the language here on power skills. So where do you want to start with that conversation? What made you want to start thinking, talking, writing about this topic?
Well, this is my ninth book coming out next year in the summer from Matt Holt at Bimbella. It's called The New Power Skills. And the premise is basically that, most all of us are hired for our hard skills, right? Our technical skills, our
Mhm.
education, our credential, our certification, our degree. And but most of us are fired or relieved of our jobs, case in point from Disney, because of our interpersonal skills, known as soft
Mhm.
skills, or now the real power skills. And so I really wanted to teach what I thought were, in essence, almost the top 30, if you will, interpersonal skills that everyone needs to master. Because at the end of the day, we're all in the same business. We are in the relationship business. That is not a cliche. If you look at the most influential leaders, they have the ability to check their ego, to listen better, to read the room, to moderate their own body language, to admit their
Mhm.
own mistakes, to offer apologies, to communicate effectively, to possess great self awareness, to frame problems right, to differentiate between their opinions and facts. Both of those are important, but they're not always the same.
Mhm.
And so I collected it started at 24 and then it expanded to 29. And so I'm still wrestling with which of these skills I really want to write about. They're all relevant. They're extremely
Mhm.
relevant as the job market and the world changes dramatically. But in essence, these are the skills that get you promoted, build your budget and your influence, build your credibility, and will get you some inoculation against being, talked to or being taken to the woodshed, which, I was on numerous occasions. I like to joke, and I mean this with deference, that my human resource file was an expandable folder because I was always saying or doing things that were, regrettable, never illegal or unethical or moral, but I just, needed an inner dialogue. I needed sometimes better discipline. Oh no, that's an internal thought, not something
Mhm.
I should be saying. So a lot of my books are confessing my sins in the hopes that others can learn from them.
I love that. And I still love how you said invited to leave. I think that's
Sure.
brilliant. Um, so interestingly, one thing I'm finding in my own coaching work, and I know it's not a new thing. I know others face this. I just kind of was inundated with a handful of these kind of all at the same time, which is, to your point, you're hired for your expertise. You're often promoted initially for your expertise, right?
Yeah.
And I've found myself coaching leaders who are stuck, having found themselves kind of in the middle of
Mm.
everything suddenly, right? Everybody's bringing everything to them, and they, you know, possibly unintentionally, maybe in some cases intentionally, have kind of wedged themselves in the middle instead of elevating up their leadership and really working through others and getting them to solve their own problems. And it just kind of rings similar here of how do you how do you begin to leave your, what we have traditionally called hard skills, that
Yeah.
expertise behind,
Yeah.
in order to step into
Yeah.
your leadership, right? Because I feel like it's an easy fallback for leaders, right? That like, well, let me just go back to the thing I'm really good at, which is, getting things done, or however you want to put that. I'd be curious what your reaction to that
Well, I
is.
think I have a lot of passion about this topic. It's the quicksand of everybody's career transition, because typically most leaders are culled from the individual contributor ranks, the top sales producer, the most effective digital designer, the most efficient dental hygienist. They become the leader of dental hygienist or the director of the creative division, or God forbid, the top producing salesperson becomes the director of sales, when we know there's
Mhm.
zero correlation between what makes you a great individual sales contributor and what makes you a great leader of sales leaders. I think the challenge is what most of us don't remember is what got us here won't take us and them there. So when we
Right.
make this transition from star individual contributor to leader of people, the primary question you have to ask yourself is, how do I get work done with and through other people? And your whole paradigm changes, right? No
Yeah.
longer are you the genius. You're the genius maker, to quote Liz Wiseman, who I think wrote one of the best
Mm.
leadership books in our generation, Multipliers. How do you get work done with and through other people? How you do that is you recognize that you don't have all the skills, that you demonstrate humility to recognize you aren't the master at everything. You hire and recruit people that are noticeably smarter than you are, and you're comfortable with that. That takes a lot of maturity not to have to be the star in everything. It's a huge transition for people. Most of us aren't trained. I mean, it's a simple conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Kent, man, you crushed it for 9 quarters in a row with your sales goal. We have an open in our leadership ranks, and we're thinking about promoting you to lead the sales team. And Ken, I need you to know that most of the skills that made you the top revenue producer are not going to serve you or the team well if you become the leader. Let's inventory those and figure out which ones are you literally going to need to leave behind and which ones do you not possess yet that you're going to have to learn. I mean, I think it's a fairly simple conversation to remind people what got you here, congrats, won't take you there. So it's a mindset shift. Ask yourself, how do I achieve work with and through other people? 9.5 times out of 10, it's your self awareness, it's your
Yeah.
relationship skills, it's exercising an unnatural level of patience. Someone else has a different process, they process
Mm-hmm.
information differently, they have a different skill set than you do. And to be able to say, wow, there are other ways to get to the same or better results that I got, your job is to ignite their genius, validate them, coach them, have high, courageous conversations on their blind spots, model feedback, all those things that maybe aren't natural for an
Mm-hmm.
individual contributor. Long answer.
Yeah. No, I love that because they're learnable, right? It is
There
learnable,
are
and
there are
there's.
absolutely learnable. However,
Mhm.
I will tell you they are learnable, but for some people it may not be worth it. I mean, the biggest,
Mm,
if you will, the biggest crisis in leadership is organizations that promote their top performers, throw them into leadership with little to no training or feedback. The
yep.
leader gets in it and realizes, oh, I hate this. I don't want to have high courage conversations. I don't want to give feedback. I want to hold people accountable. And then do they go back to their previous job? No. They either get fired or they quit and they
Right.
go to the competitor. And so
Yep.
I implore those who are identifying future leaders sit down and have really transparent conversations and say, this may not be right for you. At the same
Hmm.
time, in most companies, the only way to earn more money or to get
Right.
promoted is to lead people, and not everyone should be a leader of people. I think the leadership industry has done a major disservice promoting leadership as the most noble contribution. No, the person that's selling, because they're the ones that are paying for the salary or writing
Yeah.
the grants or, waiting on the tables or cooking the food. Those are the most important jobs that are actually providing the service. Leadership is valuable. Not everyone should be a commercial airline pilot. Not everyone should be an anesthesiologist. And not everyone should be a leader of people.
Right. Yeah. I think in my time in talent management, I tried to caution leaders against, right, careful about potentially ruining someone's career here, right? Because if this
Totally.
doesn't work and we don't provide the support, can they really step down, step back, and stay here? Which it's uncommon. Or it
Yeah.
happens, but it's really uncommon. And it takes, right, to me, that it takes to go down the path of truly learning leadership. It takes two things, right? And frankly, it's at every level, right? It's not just that first jump, but it's each level jump from there. Is you have to recalibrate what equals job satisfaction to you, right? Because let's use the sales example. As a salesperson, job satisfaction probably has something to do with closing deals, putting up big numbers. But when you're now managing a handful of sales reps, right? You might have to recalibrate for yourself. Now I'm in meetings. Now I'm coaching, right? And I've seen so many leaders struggle with even just that basic recalibration of I'm in so many meetings, I don't feel like I'm doing anything. Be like,
Mm.
that is actually the job now. So how do you find, your peace and your satisfaction with what should be making up your day to day? But it also takes self awareness too to say, there is something here. I need to make a change. I need to be doing things differently. But before we get on, I wanted to comment on one more thing, which you said was like, not everybody should be in leadership, right? And I've always thought and looked at the difference between someone's advancement drive versus their leadership drive, right? Now having both is great, right? Advancement drive being, I want that title, I want that, pay and prestige. Leadership drive being, I actually like the work of leading
Mm.
people. And in my own experience, those who have the advancement drive without the leadership drive tend to flame out. Those who have the leadership drive without the advancement drive can make it, but only so far, truly. And then, those who kind of have that combination of both have a lot more runway. But back to these things being learnable, right? You have to recalibrate what equals success to you and have the self-awareness to say something isn't working, right? There's something that's not working for me. So when you start to look at power skills, what are your thoughts on how where does someone begin in this journey with understanding which power skills do they need to focus on?
Well, it's a big question, right? I mean, one of the insights that I took from the FranklinCovey company is not just the importance of having a set of personal values, but having a set of professional values and really thinking about your career long term. What is it you really want to do? What do you want to accomplish? What is most important to you? Like my number one professional value is maximizing my income. And I'm very comfortable saying that. My number two professional value is working for and with a brand that I'm proud to associate with. And my third professional value is to work with people that I like and respect and who like and respect me. So although my number one professional value is maximize my income, I'm not willing to do that, running cocaine across the country, right? Or doing something nefarious. And so I think it's super valuable for people to get very thoughtful around what are your hierarchical professional values, and do not create them because they may sound pithy at a cocktail party or they're good for an interview. No. In fact, Ken, I don't care what you think about my personal and professional values. They're mine, and they're the lens through which I make all my career decisions. I think there's an arc to people's career. The research shows that at about the 36 month in a job, people get bored, that the challenge tends to wear off and they don't realize it. They've mastered the job. The challenge is kind of over. The euphoria of learning new skills is over, and they can kind of do it in their sleep. And what happens is they notice it after other people notice it. Others notice it, and it becomes a brand diminisher for them. So I think it's really valuable to disrupt yourself, right? Act or be acted upon, have a plan, or become part of someone else's. So I think a power skill is vision, is to have a vision for your career, not abdicate your career track to your boss or outsource it to somebody else. Because again, one of my favorite quotes is have a plan or become part of someone else's plan. So it is necessary for you to think strategically about your career. It requires you to be an insatiable, curious learner, to watch others. Are other people pursuing careers or paths that interest you? Do your skills match that? There's a time to plant. There's a time to harvest. I think too many of us confuse the two and want to harvest, but sometimes you have to plant in the culture you're in and wait till your time is there. Wait until it's the right timing. So all of that, I think, is kind of wrapped up in a bit of self-awareness, introspection. Is, do you have a vision and a strategy? Because quite frankly, right, a B plan executed is better than an A plan not executed. And it's one of the things I did best in my career is I always had a sense for where I was going, where I wanted to go. And I knew what the next role was, what the next promotion looked like, which skills did I possess, which did I not possess, and did my best to learn those so that I could earn my way into the next career. There's a lot of advice there, but I would argue that most people I meet and coach or mentor, they're thinking about the next job. And I would say, no. You're thinking about the job after that job. What's the two jobs after that? So you're building a path for yourself that's meaningful, and maybe that you have to disrupt yourself and fire yourself before the company does that to you.
Interesting. Well, I like how you've given people, with your own example, you've given people permission to put maximizing income high on the list. I was just in a conversation yesterday around what's your 7 layers of why, and the person who was sort of leading that conversation also said, hey, my number one why is to maximize my income. So this is like 2 days in a row. But I like the permission, right? That's okay. If that is one of your main goals, part of your vision, great. Just be honest about it. But then, what does that unlock for you?
Can I add a little bit to that too? Is it's not just okay. It's awesomely right. I mean, I don't know about you,
Yeah.
but I work for a living, right? My vocation is not necessarily always my avocation.
Hmm.
uh, Maximizing my income isn't about greed. It's not about
Right.
buying a 10th Porsche. It's about giving myself some independence and freedom and liberty. It's about providing for those who are dependent upon me. It's about funding the things I am passionate about, perhaps philanthropically or spiritually or
Mhm.
socially or politically. And so I am very comfortable proclaiming from a mountaintop that my number one professional value is maximizing my income, not at the expense of working with great people who respect me and who I respect,
Right.
and working for a brand that I am proud of.
Yep.
I could have earned more money, but it would have been a violation possibly of my number two and number three values. So I
Yeah.
make all my professional decisions through those three lenses. I think people should be much more comfortable declaring their values and communicating their wants and needs through them, but also making sure that you are providing the skill and the value, right? I teach my three boys all the time. You are paid in direct correlation to the skills you have. This
Hmm.
job pays this, and this job pays this, and so you have to make sure that your skills, you're developing them and you're building them in correlation to what your plan is, what your values are. Your value can be maximize your income, but if you're not learning, you know, AI skills, you're going to be obsolete in 40
Right.
years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, seeing as you brought up AI, I've been doing a little bit of thinking on this. So when you said you wanted to talk about power skills, I kind of lit up because AI is a real divisive topic at the moment. You either have people who are it's coming for all of our jobs, which
Yeah.
it's coming for some jobs for sure. Um, right. So it's become this real boogeyman. But then there's also, these conversations around, well, it's certainly coming for some of the menial tasks that maybe a lot of us have built our
Sure. Sure.
expertise around in our careers. And so, some of the conversations that I'm in are, what is this going to mean for the importance of leadership or even just power skills in general, right? Because there's still quite a bit of sci-fi technical growth to get to, I think, where the robots are humaning.
Well,
So I'd be curious.
maybe less than we think, right? But
You
um,
never know. But
my
yeah,
my
yeah,
sense
hit
is
me
you
with
and
it.
I are very closely aligned on this. This may sound like a cliche, but by and large, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to someone who knows how to use AI and how to
Mm,
leverage AI. And I think that may sound like a cliche, but it's a good lens to work through. Yes, there are going to be jobs that are lost to AI, and they probably should be so that it can become more efficient, so we can use our innate talents more effectively, so that prices perhaps could go down. I was at a conference a few months ago. It was a gathering of 100 Fortune 50 CIOs and CHROs in New York City. I sat next to an EVP from LinkedIn, and he said
mm,
something that I thought was smart. He said, at some point, robots are going to do all the work, AI is going to do all the thinking, and humans are going to be left to do all the relational, social, emotional work. Now, that may be a bit of an overreach, but I think I look through the lens of that is the power skills that are going to be the most valuable are the ones that are unique to building relationships and building
mhm.
culture and leading people through their own transformation and struggle and clarifying, right? It's like being a force of clarity. So I would encourage everyone to not swing the pendulum one way or the other. Everyone should be spending some time every day in and around AI, whether that is
Mhm.
playing with Chat GPT, whether it's listening to a podcast, watching some YouTube videos, playing with some different machine learning tools, because it's going to impact everybody swiftly. I mean, I think in 4 years, you'll be able to go into Chat GPT and say, I would like a 22,000 word book written in Scott Miller's voice that teaches
Mm.
me the 7 most important skills to open a stand at a farmer's market selling organic guavas. I made that up, but I mean, in 4 minutes, you'll have a customized book for you in my voice on those skills on that market. It's happening already. People email me and say, hey, I just landed a new job. I wrote my cover letter in Scott Miller's voice. Because you want to see it? I'm like, no, I don't want to see it because there's so much of my content between 8 books and hundreds of podcast interviews and
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn articles and Inc. magazine columns. You could write anything in my voice now. I'm not sure anybody would want to, but apparently a couple do. I think it's a good balance, right? All things in moderation. Most of these power skills are really about building relationships, and no AI is doing that.
Yeah. Interestingly, a lot of entrepreneurs are, I feel like, leaning in more on AI than I'm seeing people who are in, corporate roles at larger organizations. Now, some of that has to do with privacy concerns and IP concerns and things like that, that larger organizations, are more carefully moving in the direction of using some AI. And I think those who I've seen using it best, not to make a hard pivot and just talk about AI here, but the people who I feel like are using it best are using it as a collaborator as opposed to leaning on it to do all the doing for them, right? So it's now in some cases people are building automations and agents to take off some of the admin back office work, off their plates, which I'm sure as you also have experienced the real bear that can be as an entrepreneur. But I feel like those who I've seen and heard leveraging it best are leveraging it as a partner as opposed to, if that makes sense. Am I making any sense?
It does make sense. I see it a little differently in that.
Oh, yeah.
Only because I'm an editor and I'm a literary agent and I'm a publisher. And so I see daily all the books that are being published, not all of them, but most of them on AI. It is the number one requested topic in our speakers bureau. In fact, just yesterday, I booked a renowned author on an AI book to speak to a 5,000 person global sales team. 5,000 people that all sell a software solution. How can each of them be using AI to better meet their goals, to better meet their customer needs? And so I think depending upon the business you're in, the size of your company, the impact that AI has on your efficiency is going to be kind of like Moore's Law. I know Moore's Law is not a thing anymore, right? The computing power of a chip, but it's, the metaphor is not lost, I don't think, in terms of this conversation will be very different a year from now. I think it'll be more different a year from now than it was a year ago, right? In terms of the quantum impact every organization is having. And I don't think you're going to see a huge disruption of the workforce. I don't think you're going to see whole sectors being eliminated immediately. Maybe 3 years from now you will. But the people that will have the most leverage, the most influence, the most job security are those that master the interpersonal human power skills and keep their knowledge and application of AI really sharp. It's not one or the other. It is absolutely
both and.
Yes.
Yeah. So as people are wrestling with these changes and I think I'm where you're at too here with how power skills are going to become a real differentiator as well. Where do you recommend people start? I mean, I think, one place I would usually recommend is, and of course, because of my background, right, it would be, do you have an assessment of your skills? Do you know where you are strong, where you're not? So as you're thinking about the positioning of your book and the research you're doing, how are you recommending people move forward with assessing and determining priority here?
This may surprise you, but it all comes down to self-awareness. There's books written about it. All of us talk about it. We think we're self-aware and we're not. And so I would say it's the first power skill, by the way, in the book, is really developing your self-awareness. What does this mean? It means you check your ego and you really yearn to understand, what is it like to work with me? What's it like to be led by me? What's it like to lead me? What's it like to live next door to me? What's it like to be parented by me, to be married by me, to play pickleball with me? What's it like to join a Zoom call with me, to be standing in a trade show booth for 4 days with me? I mean, these are like really valuable questions. And the only way you know this is to ask. And you have to ask, Kent, hey, Kent, can I ask you a question? You and I just spent 3 days at the CES conference in Las Vegas. I'd love to know what it's like to be at a conference with me. And Kent's going to say, oh, you're awesome, man. You're so funny. You're so good. No, really. I want to know, like, what are the things I do that annoy people? Nothing,
Yep.
Scott. You're great. No, Kent, you're not serving me well. Because the
not
fact of
helping.
the matter is, most people are going to lie to you, right? Because most people are cowards. And that's not a character flaw. It's a personality trait. Is someone has to feel immensely safe to
Right.
actually tell you the truth, because there's no upside for them. They're going to insult you unless they're not. And so I have to be able to say to Kent, I have a courageous conversation I need to ask of you. I really want to work on my interpersonal skills. I know I have blind spots. I'm louder than I think I am. I talk more than I think I should. According to my wife, I'm not nearly as funny as I think I am. The conversation has some reference to you know who about it in the White House, and on and on and on. And so you've got to make it safe for the other person to move outside of their comfort zone and discuss with you the kind of undiscussables. I mean, if you didn't have any other power skill than just that one, is to be able to have a safe conversation. And then when Kent tells you the truth, if he does, your response has to be, wow, thank you. That was courageous. Thank you for trusting me enough not to dispute it or dismiss it or refute it or deny it. Thank you so much. Hey, can I ask you a question, Kent? I know you're not a psychiatrist, but when I do that, do you have any reason to believe? Do you know why I do that? Is there a certain situation? Do I look like I'm jealous? Do I look like I'm insecure? Do I seem in over my head? People have opinions. They watch you. They see patterns, and so all of that is to say, ask, go to people and say, hey, can you tell me 3 things that I do that delight you? And 3 things that I do that offend you? Or better yet, just are there 3 things I do that you think hold me back from building my influence, from building trust with others, from gaining credibility? People will tell you that. What are 3 areas that if I were to improve on, it could improve my influence? Wow. I don't think the vast majority of your listenership currently possesses the courage or the desire to really know what that's like. And let me tell you how I've built it. Like you, like I told you earlier, I've hosted this podcast, and between a couple of podcasts and a radio program, nearly 700 interviews of every thought leader in the world, right? Everybody from Matthew McConaughey to Mel Robbins to Melinda Gates to Deepak Chopra, everyone. And once a week, my oldest son and I come home from church and we sit in the driveway. We look at all the YouTube comments, all the hate on Reddit, all the hate, and we laugh. And it's horrible. I mean, it is vitriolic. I actually wrote a whole chapter about it in the book because we look through it and we say, well, that's kind of mean. Well, that's kind of really mean. Well, that's not true. I do that, and that's true, and that's true, and that's mean but true. And we just process it, right? I don't take it personally. You know, most of them tell me I should not be alive. Well, I think that's a little extreme. But I learned so much about what it's like to listen to Scott Miller as a podcast host and guest. I just talked for 12 minutes straight right now, right? My wife should be passing me a note. Shut up. I think the more we're open to other people's perception of us, because how we present ourselves is so rarely how we are received by others. And if you can get a grasp around how you are received by others, whoa, you've just exploded your professional opportunities. That was a long, meandering answer, but as you can tell, I'm super passionate about it.
No, I usually I credit Kim Scott with this, and I don't know that she originated it, but she, in her book Radical Candor, talks about, how do you create a feedback culture?
Yeah.
And it's the opposite of what you think, right? Most leaders would say, well, by giving feedback more courageously. And it's actually, I think what you're hitting here is it's actually by asking for more feedback openly and in public. But I think important here is not just asking, listening, and thanking, but if somebody's telling you something actionable, if you ever want that person to give you feedback again, you need to be seen doing something with that feedback
Oh,
as well.
you are speaking my language, right? The insight that I think is the most profound in Kim's book, even though it's called Radical Candor, is the fact that most people practice ruinous empathy.
Hmm.
And that's the phrase she uses. Well, I don't want to offend Kent, or I'm not sure how to say it, or no. I mean, you have to build a brand that you
Hmm.
are open to feedback. Otherwise, people will just pull the chicken switch and they won't tell you what really is on their mind. You have to build
Yep.
the reputation, the brand that I really want it. And when you give it to me, I will not shame you for it. And more importantly, I will go and behave in accordance with that, and
Hmm.
I want you to catch me doing that, so that when someone later is either disparaging me or is being duplicitous to me, doesn't trust me, that Ken can say, hey, can I tell you actually, that's actually not my experience. Scott came to me 2 months ago, asked me for feedback. I gave it to him. First of all, he received it really well. I was
Hmm.
surprised. But even more so, I actually saw him taking better notes in the meeting. He wasn't
Hmm.
always raising his hand first. He wasn't dominating. And so I've actually seen a change in Scott. You build champions for
Yep.
yourself by modeling the implementation of that. Says easy, does hard, but it is a
Hmm.
game changer for us.
And you might not always be able to put it into action. And therefore, you might have to have a follow up conversation too to say, hey, I've given that feedback a lot of thought.
Yeah.
And here's what I am, and maybe I'm not going to do with it and
Yeah.
why, but please keep it coming.
And
Um,
on that front, recognize that not all feedback is about you. Some
right.
feedback is about their ex boyfriend who looks like you, or their girlfriend who sounds like you, or
Yep.
perhaps they could even be just jealous of you and they're giving you feedback so you have to really understand, from what intent is this coming? Does this
Yep.
person really have my best interest at heart? Have I
Yep.
given them any upside to give them this feedback, giving me the
Yeah.
feedback? There's a whole art of this. And by the way, you won't get it right
Yeah.
the first time. You got to practice it. You're going to stumble. You're going to fail. You have to apologize and say, gosh, I know, Kate, you told me to stop doing this. It's so ingrained in me. I promise I'm working on it. I bought a wristband or a different pen to remind myself. People that have the right intent, if
Hmm.
they see you making attempts at improving your behavior, they'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
Right. Right. And to your point, I'm going to put it in my words, right? Not all feedback is going to necessarily be accurate or worth actioning on. But that's where I think, to your point, being curious, maybe with another person or two, approaching another person and saying, hey, here's some feedback I've gotten. Do you see that? What's your perspective on that? So you could even
Yeah,
triangulate,
well said.
and understand, is this just coming from one person? It's their experience,
Yeah, right.
which doesn't mean it's invalid. It just means, all right, so there's one person that I might need to think about how I'm, taking intentional action around versus, is this something I need to work on much more broadly?
So well said, right? Because my style, no doubt, fatigues some people, but invigorates others. And I
Right.
have to be situationally aware enough to know in what circumstance are my strengths lifting others versus diminishing others, and lifting my brand versus otherwise. I think that's so valuable. It's one of the power skills, is to be able to really understand the circumstance you're in, and are
Mm,
your strengths being overplayed? There
right.
are situations
Yep.
where I need to dial down my energy or my personality. And there's others when I should dial it up because it's invigorating to people, or it could be fatiguing. That comes
Hmm.
back to self awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. I think not only would I love to just, I think, be on a long haul flight sitting next to you chatting
No, you would
for
not.
14 hours.
My
I'm
wife
sure we
would
could,
dispute that.
all that to say, I'm sure we could keep going. Maybe I'll have to have you back in a year when your next book is
I'd
out,
be
and we
honored.
can also talk about what of our predictions of AI have and haven't come true yet. But to get us into the advice column here, what's one piece of advice you have for it? So this podcast is, one of my focuses is helping leaders step up their game in some way, right? And so what's one piece of advice you have for leaders out there?
I'm going to repeat something I said before, not because I don't have other content, but I'm super passionate about it. is to remind yourself every day you are in the relationship business.
Hmm.
And I don't think, in my experience, most of us aren't as good at developing relationships as we would like to be. It may become more natural for others. Here's a good example. I am a stutterer. I have a quite debilitating speech impediment. Have my entire life. I've been through decades of speech therapy and speech pathology, braces 4 times, Invisalign headgear. I have 2 speech coaches. There are about 36 words I cannot say in public. And part of my training was to learn how to avoid those words. I write about it extensively in my books. And sometimes I come across as quite robotic because I over enunciate my words. I over articulate my words. Sometimes I use the wrong word for a replacement term and it seems a bit awkward. And so some of that contributes to my inability to develop great relationships. I'm fairly impetuous and impulsive. I'm impatient. I'm high energy. I take control. I have some origin story anxiety from my parents for a variety of reasons. All that is to say, I am working daily on how do I become a better friend? How do I become a better leader? When am I fatiguing people? When am I dominating versus when am I setting a vision and path? When am I rushing in to save the day because I can just do it faster or quicker versus showing the patience, let somebody else struggle and do it their way? All this comes down to what can you do to better develop relationships? People want a relationship with their leader. That doesn't mean that I'm, hearing your confession every day. It doesn't mean that I'm sharing all of my sins metaphorically, but that I am, judiciously getting to know you and what are your quirks? What are your personality traits? What are areas that you need to improve upon? And I'm comfortable sharing them with you. And that I'm comfortable modeling and saying, hey, listen, I want to be a better leader, Kent. I'm sure there's some things I do that bug you. Would you share them with me? Comes back to the same theme. I mean, you see a consistent theme. I'm not a one-trick pony. I've written a lot about a lot of topics, but this is one that I see is the biggest trip up to everyone's leadership career is what's it like to be led by you?
Right.
And that requires you to sort of be situationally different with each person. I think one of the best books ever written is Gary Chapman's The 5 Love Languages. And, have you read this book?
I
You're
not
aware
cover
of
to
it.
cover.
You're aware of it, right? So he's a family therapist, a marriage therapist, and he identified after thousands of marriage encounters that there were 5 love languages. I think in order or not in order, physical touch, quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, and gifts. And usually the way you receive love is also the way you give love, which is a mistake, right?
Right.
My wife wants purses. I want to be thanked for paying the power bill. And so it's important to know what is your partner or spouse's love language, because most of us give love the way we want to receive love. The same in leadership, right? Is I want to be praised. I want to be recognized. I want the trophy. I want my picture on a PowerPoint. I want to go to Hawaii for President's Club. That would horrify my wife. If my wife knew that you were going to call on her in 3 minutes, she would excuse herself to the restroom, get in her car and drive home and would not care if you fired her over it. She does not want any recognition. It's important as leaders, you understand how do other people want to be communicated to? How do they want to be led? And it requires you to have really almost now a situational leadership style to lead everyone a little bit differently based on their needs. And that can be exhausting, but that's the new leadership standard.
That's the job. Yeah. Yeah. So for those listening who support leaders in stepping up their game, what's your advice to them?
Give them feedback. Give them feedback. Have the courage. Say, hey, Kent, I have noticed some areas in which I think you could exponentially increase your influence. If you're ever open to them, I'd love to share them with you. Happy to send them in the email, let you digest them so they can be kind of devoid of agenda and emotion. And once you digest them, I'd be happy to, go for a cup of coffee and walk around how they show up. I think the higher up you get in the organization, the less feedback you get, right? I mean, talk about a career cul-de-sac, give the CEO feedback on her last town hall PowerPoint deck. It's probably not going to go so well. But quite frankly, she needs it because everybody in the audience is moaning and groaning, wanting to take their life on the 7th longitudinal graph from Harvard Business Review.
Mm-hmm.
Stop doing that, CEOs.
Yeah.
Stop doing that. Stop the PowerPoint, get out from behind the podium, walk down to the audience and say, what questions do you have? Nothing is off limits. What questions do you have? Strategy, culture, product, innovation, collaboration. I may not be able to answer everything, but I'll be as vulnerable as I can, and I'll be as truthful as I am legally allowed to be, given the state of our organization or whatever it is, right? Stop with the PowerPoints. So the question was, how do those who support leaders help them? I think it's exercise a level of courageous and diplomatic feedback.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
Rarely happens.
So fun. We started out talking about power skills, and I feel like we've kind of really coalesced around self-awareness, seeking feedback, giving, for those who are supporting leaders, giving feedback. So for those who want more Scott Jeffrey Miller in their lives, right? Where do they find you?
Well, my wife says it's not hard because she thinks I'm a little overexposed. So you can Google me and I guarantee I come up. As I mentioned, I co-own the Gray Miller Agency. We are a fast-growing literary speaking and talent agency, and we are a publisher as well. Nice. I am no longer the host of FranklinCovey's podcast. After 7 years, I retired and passed the mantle to a new host, but there are just shy of 500 episodes, both on audio and video, that you can look at. And as I mentioned, I've written 8 books on leadership, marketing, parenting, mentorship, career development. And my 9th book is called The New Power Skills, and it'll be released in the summer of 2026.
Awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to that. Scott, thank you for agreeing to come on the podcast today. It was just a pleasure having you.
Oh, thanks for the spotlight. Appreciate it, Ken.
All right.